Hello there, you are listening to The Screen Queen, where you'll be finding your favorite movie or your favorite television show and learning something new. You'll just have to listen to find out. Here is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there and welcome back to the show. As always, last time I checked, my name is Sami Parrish and this is your host on the East Coast that brings the most, The Screen Queen. So fun fact, this was my first Harrison Ford movie. I grew up hearing how great Harrison Ford is in everything. You can't not run into pop culture and not hear Harrison Ford associated with some part of the genre. But he's taken the action genre isn't talked about enough. It's either a hit or a miss, but no doubtably, The Fugitive is probably one of his greatest ones, and that's saying a lot considering he's literally Han Solo and Indiana Jones that are both heroic action characters. But this isn't exactly in a scenario where it's like hop, skip, and jump, save the day. Like, this man is framed and he is targeted. But this is also a remake of the popular television show that came out in the 1960s. That's almost 30 years of having a show that wasn't exactly in high demand of, and then having a remake of that television show, and it becomes a out of nowhere success. Like, it even took the stars by surprise how successful it became. But think about that. A show from the 1960s gets remade in 1993 with a spin-off in 1998, and then an eventual remake of the entire series in 2001. Like, that's a big chunk of time dedicated to Richard Kimball. And now The Fugitive itself is about to be almost 40 years old, so maybe it's the time to go ahead and start talking about this thing now. So here we go. Action August begins with The Fugitive. So even though the film feels pretty self-explanatory that this is about a man on the run, there is a little bit more to this story than just being your average framed story. So the story starts with Richard Kimball being a successful doctor. He's gotten accolades. He has a great life, a beautiful wife that he comes home to every night, except the night that he comes home and finds her horrifically unalived. And through a very speedy trial, the chances were unfortunately against him with limited evidence, and they threw the book at him. And in his transition, an accident happens, and he has an opportunity to go clear his name. However, there is someone hot on his trail, and that is U.S. Marshal Sam Gerard, who has never lost a man on the run, and he is not about to start now, which makes Richard's time to figure out who framed him very short as Sam is hot on his trail, making this a very intense cat and mouse game. So as much as this film does deserve all of the accolades in the action genre and being a revitalization while being a remake of something that no one asked for but now exists, there is one problem of this movie, and it's the conviction of Richard Kimball. They just kind of rushed the process to go ahead and get him to be a fugitive, even though it's a cut and dry thing that the evidence was used against him. But the evidence used against him, it doesn't make any sense because it doesn't have a lot of evidentiary support. I'm not exactly an investigator, but I feel like all of us have gotten to a point where we can sort of know when something hasn't been properly investigated. The phone call of Laura Kimball saying, "Richard, he's trying to kill me," it's not exactly foolproof that Richard is the killer. At that point, it could be anyone with a lack of subtext to the context. It's like, sorry she didn't have time to say, "Richard, the killer is trying to kill me," or "Richard, there's a killer. Richard, comma, he's trying to kill me." Like, okay, she didn't have time to punctuate because she was unfortunately busy at the time, but that sentence alone isn't enough to convict Richard Kimball, and it's been the thorn in the film's side where it just kind of rushed to get him on the road. As much as this is a very smart film for how it's a cat and mouse, survival of the fittest, you have to use your wits in certain things, the legal thing is probably the weakest form of this movie. Now, in some cases, that does work to have a weak part of the film if you're saving it for the parts that's going to be the stronger. And some of the stronger parts do even out some of the weaker parts. Once it gets past the legal stuff, it's all uphill from there. It's like, sorry, we had a little downturn, but now we're getting to where people wanted to be here to see Harrison Ford on the run. But there is something funny I do have to mention that does exist in the legal proceeding. There is a surprise cameo in there. The woman who played Richard Kimball's mother from the original Fugitive series is amongst the crowd when Richard Kimball is unfortunately apprehended for the murder that he didn't commit of his wife. And all I can think of when I see this woman is like, man, I hate it when this happens. This happened to my son Richard. It is a nice nod considering it's the one part of the movie that they could not go through was having Richard Kimball's mom. So having her in there, it's a nice nod and I wanted to mention it. This film also has some precedence on the east side of the states. So where I live in Virginia, I have heard that The Fugitive was filmed on the border of Virginia and a little bit into North Carolina so they could use the Roanoke territory and some of North Carolina for the mountainous terrain that they clearly needed. And it's not the first time I've heard that they've used North Carolina for some movies like Last of the Mohicans. The Hunger Games I heard was filmed over in North Carolina and some parts of Roanoke. But the train wreck is still there to be seen by any tourist that want to see for themselves the disaster of Harrison Ford trying to penguin walk in foot cuffs to survival. It is kind of hilarious to know that's the fame game right there. Like the part where Harrison Ford almost dies is a tourist attraction. So when I was preparing for this episode, I put on The Fugitive, and they had a really cool DVD feature that opened up for a conversation between Andrew Davis, the director, Harrison Ford, and Tommy Lee Jones, where they were reminiscing about their time working on The Fugitive. And all three of them said that it is one of their best achievements, but not for what it did in the action genre, but for how much they enjoyed working with each other. And you know, working relationships in movies, sometimes things don't end well. And so to find out that all these guys had a good repertoire during the film and still all these years later to still talk so eloquently about each other, it's kind of some rare camaraderie in Hollywood. It gives the film so many more points onto the points it already has. Like, it just keeps building up every time. But the more this film gets older, the more I start to look at Tommy Lee Jones in this movie than Harrison Ford. I mean, no doubt Harrison Ford is definitely Richard Kimball, and there probably wouldn't be a Fugitive in this stance without him. But Tommy Lee Jones gives such a performance that you can see he's truly the one that deserves more of the accolades. He poured way too much into this. When you get introduced to what is going to be the investigator of a procedural or an action movie or whatever, sometimes the old man cliche writes itself that all you have to know is, oh yeah, this guy just takes no shit and he's going to be complaining about everything. Well, this ain't those cliches. This is Sam Gerard we're talking about. Harrison Ford showed up and did his lines, but Tommy Lee Jones took it upon himself to do unscripted writing, confirmed with the director that he could make these changes, but it was for the benefit of the character. You know someone cares about a film and their character if it's for the benefit of its continuity and its character strength. And with Sam Gerard being such a strong character, clearly there has been some work done to make this a good character, and it shows. Because in the end, Tommy Lee Jones won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, and he wasn't expecting to win anything. He was going into this as just a role that just happened to be fun. He even told his co-star, Joe Pantoliano, yeah, I don't think this thing is going to go anywhere. So imagine his surprise when he finds out that he was in the bid to win an Oscar and did. He basically had his Beyonce Cowboy Carter moment, just being like, you guys are going to give that to me? Really? Like, ever since I learned that I can't get out of this mind, I never thought that he and Beyonce would have something in common about winning something that they're like, really? Are you sure? Like, this was just for fun. You're gonna give me an award for being fun? Okay. As much as this is a film about Richard Kimball, Sam Gerard does take most of the show, and for rightfully good reason. It's almost a race in itself to see who was more compelling, Richard Kimball or Sam Gerard. Richard obviously has his wits ahead of him to be able to survive and figure out how to stay under the radar, but when you got someone like Sam Gerard that is so good about trying to find someone so seamlessly that it makes Dog the Bounty Hunter look like Sesame Street. Sam Gerard as a character could be easily cliched, but it's not. This is a cat and mouse game where you can throw everything like, you're out of order, there is nothing above the law. Sam Gerard isn't. He's like a anti-cliche because he does feel very believable in the procedural world. Whenever you hear about people on the news and they're going to go find someone, I buy this is the kind of guy they would go to when they need to go find somebody. And I think most of that stems from his origin of where he comes from is actually Les Miserables. Which, as a fun little side note, when I was telling my friends that I found out that Sam Gerard is actually inspired by Javert, and if I mispronounce his name, I am so sorry. I am not the biggest knowledgeable person of Les Miserables, so please don't come for me. But finding out that a musical inadvertently created one of my favorite procedural characters, that's something you don't hear all the time. So imagine me going up to my friends saying, oh, by the way, I found out one of my favorite characters is inspired by Les Miserables. Yeah. You can imagine the looks that I got when they said, do you mean Les Miserables? And I'm like, yeah, that thing. Looking back at him on The Fugitive, he's a very believable character in the mannerisms that he has. Like, there are certain moments that you catch of him that you want to know more about him. What else do we not know? We've just now met this guy, and we believe he's been around for 20 years doing this stuff, but how does those 20 years show? There's a scene that I want to point out, which is a great example. When Sam and the baby U.S. Marshal Newman are apprehending one of the fugitives that got out along with Richard Kimball. And while the fugitive is out with his little side piece, the guy gets a gun and attempts to shoot Newman, and Newman freezes. And on the job, that's not something you're supposed to do. And he knows that, but he still froze. So when everything was said and done, he told Sam that the shot went off and it messed up his ear and he couldn't do anything. And Sam doesn't buy it, but he knows the kid is rightfully scared for a moment. Like, it was a lapse. And he asked, well, which ear were you shot in? And he points to the ear. I'm half expecting Sam to go ahead and scream in his ear for insubordination. But all he says is, I don't bargain. Which the line was supposed to be something else. But Tommy Lee Jones had felt that the line needed to be more Sam Gerard. I don't bargain sounds more like Sam Gerard than something that could have been just easy context of procedurals. What is Sam Gerard's procedurals? That is Sam Gerard's procedurals. And he gave him a break. This was someone that he knows very well that would not mess up on the job, but we all have a moment, and we don't really get to see many characters actually allow a lapse of weakness in a moment, even in the most high-tense situation. Like right now, they can't fuck around. Richard Kimball is still out there, but he's gonna let Newman catch a break. Also, I love that he calls all of the U.S. Marshals that work under him as his kids. He even says it flat on the phone. He said, what do you expect me to do? One of them shot by kids. If it helps, I'm the one that shot him, and then hung up on the person. This is someone that absolutely would probably not get away with everything, but with the stern matter-of-fact nature, yeah, I can believe this guy can just say whatever and get away with it. This is all the way a serious film, but the way that he can just casually throw things like that, it throws the film just a little bit of a soft side so it doesn't feel entirely serious. So during the production of The Fugitive, the director Andrew Davis was bouncing around in different parts. I mentioned that he had to film most of this on the East Coast, which has now become an attraction. And his home state is Chicago. And had asked the production, can we have a permit to film in Chicago for a day? And they were like, go nuts. He's a happy camper that he gets to film in his own home state where he knows where everything's at. And wouldn't you know it, there's a St. Patrick's Day parade going on. So it's the most perfect opportunity to get a seamless scene, which now has kind of gone on to be one of my favorite scenes now, knowing that this was made just for the fun of it all. And this scene is practically a lesson in how you can make a great scene with just one direction and a few tools. He described a couple of cameramen that had some easily accessible cameras to work in the crowd without causing too much attention, and told Harrison Ford to go in the crowd and have Tommy Lee Jones follow him and try to lose each other. The scene ended up working a little too well, where Tommy Lee Jones was keeping up with Harrison Ford, but actually found moments where he wasn't sure where Harrison Ford went in the crowd. But this scene inadvertently makes the whole film into a meme. Now around St. Patrick's Day, people do share clips of Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones in the crowd trying to not find each other, and it's like, on this day we celebrate Richard Kimball escaping Sam Gerard. So even though this is clearly a dude film, like I just mentioned, male co-stars left and right, and when I went back to go watch The Fugitive, I was like, man, there's like hardly any women in here. But this wasn't made just to be like, oh, it's a macho movie, just men allowed. No. There was more of a female presence that was written into the movie, but in the long term, as well as its continuity, most of the women had to be cut. And from what I read, I wouldn't have done the women justice nor the plot. There was a character played by a pre-fame Julianne Moore, who was the one that found out that Richard wasn't a part of the hospital, even though he saved some kid's life that almost died. And she was going to be more involved with the movie. I mean, clearly within like the first moment of her being on there, oh, it's just instant click. But it would have been too much to the point that it would have been seen as like a romantic relationship was forming between her and Richard Kimball. So for the sake of keeping it that this is about a man who's trying to find the murder of his wife, if there's a woman that's helping that looks way too interested, like, that doesn't look good for Richard or for her. And it kind of just derails the movie even more, and they had to cut it. It wouldn't have been very respectful. What I read didn't make sense to the plot or for the women themselves. And in the time like the 90s where women were still trying to be figured out how to be written, I'm glad The Fugitive wasn't one of those things that set women back. There was also going to be a woman that Richard Kimball worked with, played by Jane Lynch, who also pre-fame would be with Richard. There was a possibility of like a sex scene, but here's the thing. This is a character that just lost his wife and he's about to just go sleep with more women. Like, that makes no sense for anybody. Like, Richard or the females. Like, that's just kind of a waste of the women in the movie, and it would not really paint Richard as this grief-stricken man if he's all of a sudden going to go out and go have sex with another woman. Makes no sense. So, as much as I would have loved to have seen more women in this movie, I'm glad that the way they were written in here was just enough to keep the film going. However, I do have to say this. When I read that Jane Lynch was originally going to be more, like, involved with Harrison Ford's character, and I'm like, that could have worked. Like, Harrison Ford does look like an older lesbian. I think that would have had no problems. Like, that would have fit in together. I just thought that was hilarious that when I thought about that, and I wrote this and I have to share it, and you guys are welcome. However, I will say that there is more of a female presence in the sequel film U.S. Marshals, where a new female U.S. Marshal is introduced into Sam Gerard's team, and it kind of, I'm not gonna lie, it makes up for the lack of female presence in the first film. Like, if we couldn't have it there, at least we had it somewhere. The thing that I always say about action movies is it finds a way to cater to your adrenaline emotions, and you get to turn your brain off for a little while. This is a sum of time where you don't exactly have to have things make sense. They just need to look cool. They just need to look like someone out there knows how to make a fight scene look awesome. Or in this case, making the chase look so engaging. It didn't have to be this smart. It could have just clocked in everything, gave every single reference, but it chose to be fresh, to introduce a whole new audience to the story of The Fugitive. And that's a nice addition to the action genre. But for the way this film exists, despite some things, It's one of the most perfect action thrillers that kind of almost exists as its own time capsule and doesn't really need anything more, need anything less. I use the word perfect movie a lot if it's doing the right thing, it's giving you what you want to see, it's not pissing you off, it's entertaining you, and you find new things to love afterwards, and that's something that is doing something right in terms of a film to show. I mean, if I had to watch a movie about two old dudes chasing each other around, I'd watch this one. Right? I have a little co-star around here somewhere. The fact that y'all just heard. Benji completely agrees. So that's gonna make it a wrap on The Fugitive. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the first episode of Action August. So here is your hint for the next episode of Action August. This one is also a remake. This one came out in 1994. And the star of this movie also has a sequel coming out this Friday. And I think y'all are gonna get what I'm talking about if you can pick up what I'm dropping, Home Slice. If you would like to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Screen. Recently, I have been filling that account up a little bit more with some fun reels. And I'm also available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, anything that's pretty much a listening device at this point. I also wanted to make a second awareness to my last episode in regards to my friend Travis, who has some health issues and is asking for whatever help can come his way. He's not picky about how much it is because we're all on the struggle bus these days, and I will have his links in the description box if anyone is able to donate or pass it along to someone who can be able to help out, because we all need some help. And that is going to be a wrap for me, guys. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here before I am framed myself. And y'all take care, stay amazing, please stay cool. We have one more month left of summer, and I hope we all don't melt before then. Until then, this is your Screen Queen, signing off. Benjilicious, do you want to say goodbye? Okay, that was a hell of a goodbye. Bye-bye!